Trevor and I got married on the 10th of October 1964, and we went off on honeymoon like happily married couples do. At our wedding, we'd had a lovely wedding, lots of presents and speeches and all the usual things, and a congratulations telegram from the company that he worked for, which was Starline Paints. They were based at Southend. Now, we went off on honeymoon, and when we came back, we were going to stay for a week with my new parents-in-law. And Trevor had a load of letters and things waiting for him there. Anyway, when they went off to bed, he told me very quietly that actually he had been made redundant. He'd been sacked on his honeymoon by the company. The company had got into financial difficulties and they'd operated on the basis of the last in, first out. So although he had just had a review telling him that he was doing very well in his job, he no longer had a job. This is not the best start to a marriage, I don't think. Anyway, we went to bed and I woke up in the night to find he'd disappeared. He'd just gone. And he'd gone for quite a long time. And he'd actually gone out walking all around the streets of Brentford and that area, trying to come to terms with this awful situation he found himself in. Anyway, we had been very, very lucky because I worked at the Bank of England. We had been able to get a mortgage from the London County Council, which meant that we could buy a house in Henley-on-Thames. We could have backed out of buying the house, but of course at that point we would have had trouble getting anywhere to live because Trevor didn't have a job. Anyway, so we went ahead, finalised buying the house, and a week later we were ready to move in. We hired a van and drove down with loads of bits and pieces, and we moved into our house. Now, because it was a Sunday and we hadn't had any time to organise it, there was no gas or electricity turned on in the house. There was water. So we moved in on the Sunday, and on the Monday I had to get up and go to work in London. Now, I was expecting to catch a train that would leave Henley at about 7:45 to get me to Paddington and then across to the bank. However, they'd changed the timetable, hadn't they? So I actually had to catch a train at 7 a.m. instead. So, October, I get up in the dark, I get dressed in the dark, I go round to the station in the dark, and I start my commuting up to the Bank of England. Trevor, desperately looking for a job, goes on a job search, and he's got a couple of interviews lined up in various parts of London. So he goes off on his interviews. Anyway, when I get back from work, I come back to about 6 o'clock at night to a dark house, no electricity, no gas. Let myself in and I wait for Trevor. But Trevor doesn't come. He doesn't appear. Anyway, I'm sitting there feeling really lonely and sad and very worried. There were no mobile phones in those days. I had just no idea where he was, what was happening. So eventually I saw somebody walk across in front of my house, and it was my next door neighbour. Now, she didn't know we'd moved in. So when I opened my door and said hello to her, she really was frightened to death. Anyway, Joy was very kind, and we had a chat, and she was very she was very nice to me, actually. Anyway, I eventually, round about 9 o'clock at night, I walked round to the local, to a telephone box and phoned my mother and father because I thought he might have phoned them. He hadn't. Anyway, he arrived on the last train from Paddington, so about midnight, and I'd been all alone in the dark. We stayed happily married.